Welcome to The Kicker. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. Today, my guest is Kenya Hunter, who for a while was one of the best reporters out there covering public health, especially as it relates to Black Americans. And she left journalism several months ago to become a doula. So she's a doula working with Black pregnant people in Atlanta. And I just was so curious to ask her about the transition from covering health to actually being a health worker. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Kenya Hunter, welcome to The Kicker.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've been so excited to talk to you because I've been a fan of yours for a long time.
Oh my goodness.
But for those people who don't know you, tell us who you are and what you do.
Man, so I'm Kenya. I am a journalist and now in communications. I also am a podcaster and I'm a doula.
I love this. You have so many different jobs.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to have you on is because for a long time I've wanted to talk to somebody for this show who left journalism, left a newsroom to do something interesting. And I had been following your doula journey and I was like, okay, this is perfect. Especially because for a long time you covered public health. And so I'm really interested in that transition. But let's go back to the beginning first. I saw you say somewhere that you wanted to be a journalist, like from the time you were small.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your path into journalism.
Okay. So, I born and raised in Georgia, raised by my mother, and there's a few different stories about this. So one is, my parents they divorced when I was maybe 4 years old. So what I remember is on a visit with my dad, I was just really small and just really struggling and being like, I don't know what on earth I want to do when I grow up. There's so many options. And I don't know. I could be a weather girl. Weather girl is what I remember the most. But I could be a weather girl. I could be this, I could be that. I don't know. And he was like, well, you like to write? And I was like, yeah. He was like, why don't you write for the newspaper? And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I was just thinking, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I was probably 7 or 8 at this time. The story my mother would tell me, may God rest her soul, was, so my mom, very religious woman, a minister. The story that she tells me is that when she was pregnant with me, she was at some church, went to the priest, he touched her stomach and was like, I'm seeing Oprah. I'm seeing journalism in her future. And so my mom will tell you that it's been anointed on me since birth. My dad will tell you it was his idea.
Classic divorced parents. I love that.
I
know. Also, we won't do it on this podcast, but we got to do minister mom chat at some point. Because we also have a minister mom.
I could talk about her. I lost her in 2019, sadly, to breast cancer, but I could talk about her for days. And she inspires so much of everything I do. So we may end up talking about her as we go on throughout the show because she inspires so much of everything that I do.
Yeah. As a person also with a minister mom, I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like a lot comes from there.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then you went to college for journalism, followed by grad school for journalism, right?
Yeah. So I went to Brenau University in Gainesville, Georgia, and that was an interesting time, which really, I think, solidified exactly how I wanted to do journalism. So, again, in the South, Brenau was an interesting time for me because I went to school in the backdrop of Trayvon Martin in 2012. I was a sophomore in high school when Trayvon Martin was killed. And then shortly after that, 2 years later, Mike Brown was killed by a police officer in Ferguson. And that's when I started college, was in 2014. And so it was a lot of the Black Lives Matter things going on, along with President Trump running for office at the time against Hillary Clinton. And we're coming off of the Obama presidency. And at the time, I was just finding myself very angry about the things that Black people were going through. And I also just didn't understand why everybody else around me wasn't angry. And not only that, why some people, I don't want to say didn't seem to care, but there seemed to be this air of opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement. And so that was when I decided I really wanted to do journalism for Black people. I wanted to focus on race relations. And then comes the rest of my journey where I was like, oh, you you may not be able to do that how you want to in journalism.
Mm.
And so that was kind of what led to my exit, but I know we'll get there. With the minister mother also came my teacher mother as well. And getting out of college and going straight into work, that wasn't a thing that we did in my family. We got our master's degrees.
Oh, wow.
And so I had no choice but to go. I don't want to say no choice, but I didn't want to go to grad school because I was just like, I don't feel like I need to. I actually did need to, but so I went to Emerson College in Boston, which turned out to be one of the best moves I made in my life. I would get on the train station up there, and go to city council meetings and listen to, at the time, Michelle Wu was on the city council, and I believe she's the mayor of Boston now.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting moment for me because I grew up in Georgia, where at the time it wasn't acceptable to really talk about race in politics, whereas in Boston they were always talking about race. And it was also a different way for me to experience race relations because it was, I call it a different flavor of racism, where it wasn't so in your face as it is in the South, but it was that the thing that I remember was that people were always talking about race and talking about how bad race relations were, and how there was the infamous study that happened in Boston where it showed that the average Black family was worth like $8 or $3, something like that, whereas a white family was worth like somewhere in the thousands of dollars. But there was all this conversation about it, but I remember Boston being one of the most segregated places I had ever witnessed, where you could get on the Orange Line. And I'll never forget this. I remember I was on the Orange Line once, and I had to go to the bathroom. So usually if I was on the Orange Line, I would get off on Roxbury or in Chinatown. Roxbury was where a friend of mine lived, and then Chinatown was where Emerson was. And the first time in my time in Boston, I got off on Back Bay Station. And Back Bay was just a whole nother world. Yeah. And it was in between these two stops. You get out on Back Bay, and it's the Neiman Marcus is right in front of you. And so, yeah, that Emerson was an interesting time for me as well, and how I processed and understood race in America, because I'm coming from the South, from the deep South at that. I'd only really experienced it in that way, but in the North it was, and I also think Boston was a trendsetter in how people talked about race as well, because then by the time I came back down to Georgia, there was more of the discussing race relations.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it was surprising. It was very surprising to me to see, but yeah, it helped me understand a lot more and understand how racism isn't just overtly in your face, but it's also in our systems as well. I think Boston was really integral for me to understand systemic racism, truly.
So what were you thinking at that point about what you wanted your journalism career to look like? Because you said you wanted to do journalism for and about Black people, but you were also looking at the realities of the media industry, which were maybe better than what they are now, but like not great at that point. So how were you thinking about translating this into like a sustainable journalism career?
I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was just like, I'm just going to do it. My first job was at the Rome News Tribune in Rome, Georgia. Shout out to John Bailey up there. He was the first person that hired me. I was just doing the assignments I was told. It was a small newspaper, so we would write 2 stories a day, which was so easy to me. Writing 2 stories a day. And then I also was the education reporter there too. So what I started noticing, and this was when I started getting into like the race things, was I noticed again how segregated the schools were, because Rome is like this big. It's like, I don't think Rome is bigger than 10 miles in a radius, maybe. If John Bailey listens to this and I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. But but it's a small town. But I remember all of the Black students being in one school, in the elementary schools, and all the white students being in another school. And then when you go to the high school, you can see the segregation there too, where you're because it was only one high school and one middle school. So in the high school, you could guess almost what elementary schools the kids went to,
right,
based on where they were placed. The first story I remember writing about race in Rome was about school segregation in the gifted programs.
Oh.
and I got good feedback from my boss. It was solid story, good information, and it made some buzz around the city.
Yeah, no, so you were only in Rome for like 6 months, right?
Yeah,
Before
5 6
getting
months. Yeah,
Okay, so then you get hired at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, a much bigger paper covering
yeah,
education there.
uh-huh,
And Virginia, not the South in the same way as Georgia, but below the Mason-Dixon.
yeah.
So yeah, what was that experience like, and what did you take from that about the kind of journalism you wanted to do going forward?
When I got hired at the Times Dispatch, at first I didn't want to go because I had this plan in my mind that, okay, I'm going to stay at the Rome News Tribune about a year. Then I'll shift over to the Marietta Daily Journal. Then I'll go to the AJC, thinking natural order of things.
Yeah,
And it's crazy because I've never worked for the AJC.
that is crazy.
But I'm a really loyal person. And so I'm not really one to just job hop. Like I don't love that. I don't love dipping out on jobs because I'm incredibly loyal. And so I felt like, and this was my first job, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna feel like I'm betraying John. I'm gonna feel like I'm betraying my team at the time they need us the most. But I actually had ended up moving to Rome. I was probably living in Rome for about 3 weeks at this time, and I had a roommate who worked at the paper, and my roommate got laid off because of the COVID things.
Oh.
And so I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna have to take this job offer at in Richmond because we had 2 rounds of layoffs and then I took a pay cut as well. And so I was just like, I think for the longevity of it all, and I really hated to do it. Richmond was closed when I got there. It was one of the places that wasn't opening back up until probably 2021, maybe 2022, if I can remember correctly. They were very resistant to opening back up. And race was a big part of it as well. Um, Richmond Public Schools is a mostly Black and
Mhm.
Hispanic school system. And the superintendent, who is still the superintendent, Jason Camrus, was very adamant about doing his best to not disenfranchise Black and Hispanic students. And so was the school board. And I think that's because of that democratic mindset that they had.
Mm.
And Jason was also someone who was very interested in the racial relations of it all. I Most of his team had studied race in education, and so that was a lot of what was happening. And a lot of the that informed a lot of the decisions that they made about reopening, and
Mm.
especially with COVID-19 being something that was disproportionately killing Black and Hispanic people and causing job loss for Black and Hispanic people and causing long COVID and disability. So when I was there, that was the backdrop of everything. And it was different. It was different because then at the same time you have um, the protest over George Floyd happening.
Mhm.
So I'm in the capital of the Confederacy. Weeks prior, I'm roaming around Richmond. Someone was like, yeah, you need to go to Monument Avenue. I go to Monument Avenue. These statues, they were clear. Nothing was on them. They had lights that shone on them, like shining on them. There were these show lights that were shining on them, and that really stuck out to me. And then the Robert E. Lee one,
Mhm.
oh my God, that thing was humongous. It was huge, and it invoked in me this feeling of thinking about where my mother came from, because my mother had me when she was 41, so she was older.
Mm.
So my mom was actually bused to school during the time of integration. And so I'm not far removed from that lineage. I'm aware that I'm in this place that endorsed massive resistance, and I'm working at this place that endorsed massive resistance. Because yeah, that was a big thing at the
Wow.
paper. That was a
Wow.
big thing at the paper. And I'm thinking about just my grandmother, my great grandmother, my great great grandmother, who I can't get past who my family members are, and I know for a fact that's because of slavery. And so
Mhm.
I'm thinking about these things as I'm on Monument Avenue and witnessing the protests. These statues had literally nothing on them. They were clean. They were beautiful, beautiful in the sense like there's nothing on them.
Sure.
Only for like a few weeks later for all chaos to erupt across the nation,
Uh-huh.
and people turned the Robert E. Lee Monument into the debatable word of art, because there were some people that thought it was artistic, because I don't know if you saw like the graffiti and everything that was
Yeah,
on
yeah.
it. Yeah. And then some people being like, the people living on Monument Avenue, some of them being like, this is gonna bring my property value down by like 50K.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that shaped a lot for me, and I ended up writing about a few things. There was Maggie Walker Governor School that I wrote about. That was this 3-part investigative series that I did.
Right.
And the thing about that was so interesting, I found out about Maggie. So Maggie Walker, for those who are listening and don't know, Maggie Walker is she was the first Black woman in the nation to charter a bank, and she also ran for state superintendent in Virginia, a very phenomenal Black woman whose great great granddaughter, I think, still lives in Richmond. Her name's Liza Mickens. But the Maggie Walker Governor School, which is the school for gifted kids, at the time I think only had like maybe 50 something Black students there, like 9 through 12. 54 Black students out of 754 students overall. But before it was Maggie Walker Governor School, the school for gifted students, it was Maggie Walker High School, which was one of 2 Black schools in Richmond Public
Mhm.
Schools during segregation. And so, which I was shocked by it, because the first time I read about Maggie Walker, it was these kids who were, I think, trying to build an app for kids in the pandemic or something. It was something like that. They were doing something generous for the kids in the pandemic. So I do this 3-part series. And one of my favorite parts was I interviewed a grandfather who went to the governor's school, not to the high school. And he was like a football superstar there and all of that, and he just remembered this Black excellence culture. And his granddaughter went to the governor's school, and she had a completely different experience as a Black
Yeah.
person at the school, which is, mind you, in the same building. That was probably the biggest takeaway for me, was that everywhere in the nation has their stuff, no
Mhm.
matter how progressive they are, no matter how progressive they aspire to be. Everywhere has their stuff, and everyone is trying to kind of reckon with it. And everyone is choosing in this moment how they're going to reckon with it.
Yeah.
Under pressure, not under pressure, some places under more pressure than the next. Because I watched Richmond do that in all different ways, whether it was figuring out how to get more Black and Hispanic students in the governor's school without, quote unquote, lowering standards, or figuring out how they're going to reopen the schools in an equitable way
Mm.
to hopefully keep people from getting sick, to watching the state pressure Richmond Public Schools into reopening.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that in that job and in Rome, like, your job title wasn't covering race, but of course, covering education in America is covering race.
Exactly.
And so, but then you go to Capital B, which is like very specifically a publication covering Black life in America.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, race, you're the public health reporter there, but like race is your job in a different way.
Yeah.
What drew you to Capital B, and what was that transition like to go from newspapers to like this?
Yeah, exactly what you just said. I really wanted to cover race. Things, my editor actually had just left and went to the Washington Post.
Mm.
Sad. And I also had just known, I had gotten more set in this idea of covering race, because like I told you before, at first I was just like, I'll just be a Black reporter with my opinions about things and I'll write about it when I can. And then I think my reality just became that wasn't going to satisfy me, that wasn't going to work long term.
Mhm.
And also I had this urge to come back home.
Mhm.
I wanted to go back to Atlanta, and then pops up Capital B and they're looking for a health reporter. And I was nervous about it because I was just thinking, I've never covered health before, don't know much about it. I had watched my colleague, Sabrina Moreno at the Times Dispatch, who's now at Axios, cover race, because she was focused a lot on COVID-19 and Latino relations in Richmond. And I remember how hard her job seemed, and also the moments that I had where I was doing math and all these things about COVID and looking up what a protein on a virus means, and
Mhm.
I still barely know what that means. And I was like, geez, public health or covering health in Atlanta, okay, well, let's see what we have to do. And the transition was interesting because, yeah, it wasn't like a newspaper. I remember my first day at Capital B, that was when there were these bomb threats happening at HBCUs. And I remember being like, all right, boom, we need to write, let's go. And everyone was like, whoa, slow down. And I was like, slow down?
Oh, wow.
What do you mean slow down? But we ended up writing a really good story the next day. And that was my first byline at Capital B was actually an education byline, even though I was the health reporter. And it was about how violence while trying to get an education for Black folks wasn't new. Like, you know, and we went into the backdrop of the 4 little girls who were bombed in Alabama and Montgomery. And just a lot of different, and Brown versus Board of Education. We were talking about that. And I think what was interesting about Capital B for me was that I had the opportunity to go into those backdrops because we're not writing a same day story. We're doing the thing that the first day story doesn't get to do, which is look at history, talk to Black experts, which a lot of people don't get to do when they're reporting, and building a Rolodex of incredible Black experts. So I think my favorite thing about Capital B was being able to focus on Black folks unapologetically so, and being in a newsroom that cared so much about Black people, and you don't have to gauge who has your opinion and who doesn't,
right,
like you do in a regular newsroom. And I think that my favorite time, unfortunately, was when we were covering, there was a closure of a hospital here in Atlanta, in the South Side specifically. And so South Atlanta is where a lot of Black folks live, and it's the most disenfranchised, most disinvested. And so Wellstar had closed Atlanta Medical Center South, that campus, which was the only hospital south of I-20 within Fulton County. So that left Southern Regional Hospital in Clayton County, and then Piedmont Fayetteville, which was in Fayette County. And so, and I mean, I've even had personal experiences living on this side of town now where it's like, okay, there's no emergency room near us. You're having an emergency and we have to drive 20 minutes to the hospital. And there's no telling what's going on. There's no telling what could happen. They just built a hospital down the street from me now, but this is 4 years later after those closures. And then shortly after they closed Atlanta Medical Center South, 6 months later, they closed the main Atlanta Medical Center campus, which was known as Georgia Baptist. And I talked to one woman named Angie who told me that she had COPD and she would walk to the hospital. It was almost a second home for her. She would walk to the hospital to get treatment. And then not only did she lose her hospital, but she also lost a lot of her lung specialists too when because they closed the whole thing, like from the hospital, the ER to the medical offices and all those things. And a lot of people lost a really valuable resource because it was also one of the 2 safety net hospitals in the city. And it was the only other level 1 trauma center. So now Grady is the only level 1 trauma center that you can go to. The rest of them, it's like, if you have level 1 trauma, you can only go to Grady. And Grady is already so busy. I believe this that stuck out to me the most when that time happened was that Grady, I believe their maternity ward, they were seeing like 25 to 30% more patients at that time. And I mean, Georgia is already known for its issues with birth, and the whole South really, which is kind of what led to me being a doula.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, I first became aware of your work when you were at Capital B. And I just remember sort of like what you were talking about, like reading these stories that added so much depth, right? Like I would go in knowing that there was a maternal mortality crisis and knowing that it disproportionately affected Black women. And then I would read your story about it and it would add so much texture to those like very basic facts that I knew. And it would just like really made you sort of a must read for me because I felt like I was learning about not only what was going on in that moment, but also like, yeah, the history, the context, like how it fits in with everything else. I've never lived in the South. And I remember thinking just like, oh man, this is a kind of journalism that we need a lot more of, frankly.
I would agree. And I'm glad that Capital B is still doing its thing and rocking
Yeah.
out, because they're still doing incredible work.
Yeah.
My homegirl Madeline Thigpen is still there doing criminal justice reporting. And I honestly think that her, no bias here, of course, because, you know, journalists, we're not biased at all. But I think that Madeline has some of the best reporting on Cop City. Her and my former colleague Adam Mahoney had some of the best reporting on Cop City, which then I think really put some things into perspective for me about the environment too, and how some of those things add up. But I can tell you about like my doula stuff, actually. Can I tell you about that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'm a part of this I guess collective, this network called Inner Light Holistic. I just graduated from the year-long mentorship under Shakana Haley. The way that I ended up thinking maybe I want to be a doula is my friends Mimi and Chanel. So Mimi is works at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. She's the perinatal workforce development manager. And then Chanel, I believe at the time, was working at Sister Song, working over the Birthing Care Justice Fund, I think. So Chanel is like living her best life. She's out in Liberia doing her thing. But she was like, yeah, United States not for me anymore. And she's doing birth work out there. But I interviewed them for various stories. I interviewed Mimi for the first time when Georgia had made its abortion ban stricter once Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I was like, I want to talk to an abortion doula. And Mimi was the only abortion doula I talked to and that I knew of. And she's full spectrum, but yeah, she focused on abortion doula care at the time, I believe. And then Chanel, I talked to her when the latest maternal mortality crisis report had been put out. And so I met them, and they were part of Inner Light Holistic. And I didn't know that at the time, but I would talk to them the most and was just so interested. And what put doula work together for me, and where I was like, I think I want to do this. Mimi was just showing that she was cooking for somebody for one of her clients. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that.
Wow.
That was really what put it together for me. So now my practice is focused on like ceremony, and I'm also an abortion doula, and but I also do meal prep and herbalism as well. Learning about herbalism. So I don't like prescribe people things because, you know, yeah. But I mostly focus on postpartum care. And the way I ended up in Inner Light was that, which was such a transformational experience for me. The way I ended up in Inner Light was I went to an event after I decided I was going to be a doula. I went to this event called, it was with Black Health, called A Letter to Mothers. And I sat at this one table, and it turned out I was surrounded by Inner Light Holistic doulas. And I met Chanel in person for the first time. Because I'm sure you know how that goes, where you are talking to a source all the time and y'all have never met in person.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't think that Capital B would be a direct path towards doula work.
Yeah.
I really was not anticipating ever desiring to leave journalism. I wasn't thinking that I would want to, I thought I would do doula work and journalism at the same time.
Okay. Because you started doing doula work when you were still at the AP, right?
Yes, I was at the AP. Yep, I surely was. So
okay.
The way that happened, I get the job at AP. And AP was probably the best job and hardest job I've had. But it was also the thing that made me go, okay, I don't think this legacy media thing is for me. I had I don't know how candid I want to get with this, but I had a hard time at AP. I had some hard moments at AP. And I think some of that being because I'm a Black journalist who really, at this point, I'm adamant about writing for Black people. And not only that, I've been pretty unapologetic throughout my career about that. And there were definitely moments where I felt like I wasn't enough. Like my work wasn't enough. My work wasn't wanted. My work wasn't needed. And so actually hearing you say that I was a must read for you is like, really? Because
huge.
Thank you. But also that was when I first started dealing with like pitch culture, you know. And I wasn't really used to that. That was actually one of my biggest things at Capital B. But I will say, I think that for my future, working that muscle, that pitch muscle, is definitely something that has been beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Because I started figuring out how to convince an editor that a story they may not even want to do is actually worth their time. And, you know, I didn't get yeses on everything, but I started getting a lot more yeses once I started figuring out
Mm.
that pitch. Once I started figuring out that pitch, once I started figuring out that central question, and this is how I'm going to answer it. And these are the people who are going to answer it for me. And these are people who I'm going to talk to. And I don't even have to put myself in it.
Yeah.
That's how I started figuring things out, because, you know, like I said, I was going in like trying to save I'm like, I'm going to save the world with my journalism. But AP, you're not going to do that when you're one of like 1,400 journalists. You're not going to do that. You can be a standout. And I had standout moments, but it's just, that's not what the AP is there for. And that's not to say that the AP doesn't have its role in journalism, because quite frankly, I think the Associated Press is a much needed place, especially in this time of heavy misinformation, heavy agenda focused journalism, air quotes, where you have people literally purposely misleading people for the purposes of getting their own agenda across.
You wrote at one point, I actually want to read this full quote, and we'll link to the post in the show notes, but
Okay.
You wrote at one point, I don't feel that I was only called to do journalism. I don't think that. I think that I have many callings. So after I left the field, I got really serious about mine because I really wanted to live a life that I feel proud of. Because once I examined my life in traditional journalism, I looked around and thought about the life I'm living. And I was just like, would I really be proud of this if I hit my deathbed today? Would I be proud of the things that I did not say to uphold a newsroom's reputation? And the answer was no. And that like really hit me, because your Substack and your podcast are called Finally I Can Talk.
I was like, where did you find that? You were really doing your research. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, man. You can't do a reporter's podcast. But I think like I want to hear about that, because you had been aiming toward this very traditional journalism career your whole life. And then all of a sudden your contract expires at AP. The contract's not, you find out, going to get renewed. And rather than, I mean, I'm sure there were terrible moments of grief, but also rather than just purely wallowing in it, you seem to really take to it like, okay, cool, here's the freedom I have now. And that is not easy for a lot of people who leave journalism. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
No, I really appreciate you asking that and bringing that quote back to my attention, because first off, I really need to write on my Substack again. And then I want to get back to the podcast. Part of the reason I had stopped was because of the work I was doing with Innerlight. Innerlight, I read a lot of books. It was like, so Shakana Haley is a professor at Spelman. And so she had us reading. And I think Innerlight was so key to that, though. Innerlight was so key to why I wasn't afraid. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared. There were actually many moments I was scared. I find myself still scared today. Because I think one thing I know is that oftentimes our calling is the one that we refuse. And I think that part of my calling is to create safe spaces for people, whether it's creating the Black Feminist Book Club, or creating the ceremony or the space for a grieving mom or someone who had an abortion and is kind of trying to reckon with what that means for them spiritually, or someone who is a transplant in Atlanta, just had a baby and is like, yeah, my mom is 5 hours away. I don't know. I think my calling is that. The many callings thing is definitely a product of ADHD and also having just many interests, and but also what I believe I was put on earth to do. I remember the day I found out my contract wasn't going to be renewed, I tried my best for like maybe 30 minutes to get back to work, and I couldn't do it. I was like, yeah, I'm taking the day off. And I cried and I cried and I cried. I cried for a very long time, but I also was leaning towards, like in the back of my mind, like being like, geez, I wish there was a reality where I didn't have to do this. I wish there was this reality where I didn't have to pretend like my opinions aren't part of who I am. Pretend like I'm doing work that I think is necessary to get Black people free. Because I think at that point, I knew that's what I was. I knew I wasn't doing that. Like, I knew that the work I was doing was not going to get Black people free. And again, it's not to say that AP does not have its role. AP just was not my role. Traditional journalism just was not my role. There are so many great journalists who are doing that work. And I also had space to do some of that work too. Like, I worked with the race and ethnicity team Shout out to Aaron Morrison and Kat Stafford. I worked with them I wrote a story about how Black women were talking about taking their step back after President Trump had won the election. And I loved writing that story. I also wrote about the racism as a public health crisis and how there was literally like not much happening after that. And so I had moments, but I didn't want to just keep having moments.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the things. I wanted that to be my life. I wanted to be in a world where social justice was center of my life and not an afterthought or a secret that I had to keep. Because that's what it felt like. It felt like a secret. It felt like a secret that I was reading Bell Hooks after work. It felt like a secret that I was reading Asada Shakur after work. That it felt like a secret that is what kept me grounded. But Inner Light was such a big part of that because I'm reading Sisters of the Yam. I'm reading Killing the Black Body. I'm reading Birthing Justice. I'm reading Welcoming Spirit Home. I'm reading these things and learning what freedom can really look like for me. And don't get me wrong, like I was scared. I was scared because it's like, yeah, I went into all the student loan debt. I moved to Boston, had my mother pray over me and anoint me. People interceding on my behalf to do this journalism work. But then I'm like, geez, I don't think this is what I was not supposed to do. I think I was supposed to have my time in it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was going to be the rest of my life, though. I thought I was going to be on my deathbed and my obituary was going to say that I worked for these news organizations for 20 years and that I dedicated 60 years to journalism. But I just was looking around and thinking about, if I don't do the work, if I'm not in front of a city council yelling at them about like how Black people are being disenfranchised in these ways because y'all won't put a traffic light somewhere. Because I wake up thinking about this stuff. And I told my boyfriend this before. Like, I was like, you don't wake up and think about the ways that racism is disenfranchising us? And he's like, no, I don't. Do you? And I was like, yeah, all the time. Like, there's a spot in our neighborhood where there's not a traffic light. And I'm like, I really would love to go down to city council and tell them, like, we really need a traffic light here. And I bet that would change everything. But it's not going to. But what I wanted to do, organizing is the point of it. I wanted to be an organizer. And I wanted to do real community work. And the first time I did real community work was when I became a doula and I had my first client. And I was just in her house cooking for her, cleaning up her house, holding the baby so she could take a shower, doing these things, and then also talking with her about postpartum depression and the way she was experiencing it, and then giving her resources for that. You know, because I think I also learned that community work is not just like getting in front of a bullhorn and yelling at the city council or at a committee in the state house. It's also going into people's homes and being a trusted source of information. And I think that's definitely one thing that AP gave me. We used to have to vet studies for JAMA, the Journal of American, the American Medical Association. Yeah, I used to have to read studies and be like, okay, this meets AP standards, this doesn't. And that was my first time seeing like good research and not so good research. I had actually come across the whole like Tylenol pregnancy thing well before it became like a mainstream thing. And I did toss that study aside because and not because of any biases, but I was just, based on our work and based on our standards, it just wasn't good research.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think AP gave me that. I have a lot of information about public health and I talk to people about it. And I'm like, hey, listen, this study, I looked at it, the one that you're talking about, and it's not that good. It only has like 5 people in it. And so I feel like every step of mine is ordered. And I've always felt like that about my life. One thing about it, every step of mine is ordered. My mother told me one time, so again, a praying woman. I remember one time she told me that God told her that my future was taken care of. And I've always leaned into that promise that God gave her, was that my steps are ordered and that everything is taken care of for me. And so I think that was one thing that didn't freak me out, was like, I was like, well, God told my mama that I'm fine. So something's going to happen. I don't know what, but something's going to happen. But with Inner Light, my doula sisters were there as I was processing the grief of what would be the journalism career I envisioned, because I decided I didn't want to go back. I decided I didn't want to do that again. You know, my big dream was working at the New York Times, but I just couldn't see myself doing it again because there were so many devastating moments, so many good moments, but also some where I was just beside myself about how can we do the work like this? How can I do the work like this and be proud of what I'm doing? And the answer was I couldn't. And so that's why I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to call it here. I did the thing. I worked at the Associated Press.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at the place that made the style book. And so I felt like I did it. I felt like I did what I was supposed to do in journalism, and it was time for me to really dig into that community work. And I think it had to happen that way, because you then come to understand that you don't have to go out there being superwoman, superman, super they, whoever super is for you. You don't have to do that. The community work is definitely one by one. And I also think I needed it through this traditional context, but also then with Inner Light experiencing this spiritual context of it too.
Mm.
And my doula sisters, I couldn't have gotten through that part of my life without them, because they were the ones who pointed out, like, you have more freedom. You can do this. You can you can finally talk about this. And that's where Finally I Can Talk came from, was that, oh, I can talk about Love is Blind without looking unprofessional.
Uh-huh.
I can talk about the way Love Island makes Black women look and feel, and how it, because that's actually something I want to talk about whenever I pick up this. This is my first time picking up this podcast mic in months. I want you to know that.
I'm honored.
And my headphones, my pink headphones. Yeah. Talking about how Love Island is a microcosm of the dating world, and then not having people question how I'm going to be able to do public health reporting about race because I said this one thing about Love Island.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. I want to wrap up, but one of the things you said that just had not occurred to me, and then as soon as you said it, it made total sense, is that when you're a doula, you're a trusted source of information. So being a journalist is in a lot of ways like the perfect training for being a doula, because
Yes.
you have to go in there with like, no, this is what is actually true. People are scared when they're having their first babies, right? And so you have to sort of apply that same rigor in a way where you can guide somebody through some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you look to the future now? You have this doula practice, you're working in communications for the county. You seem so energized about all of this stuff.
I
Like, how do you
am.
think about your career after, a little bit away from journalism, which you thought you would spend the rest of your life in?
I think the way I'm thinking about it now is just more autonomy. I think, yeah, more autonomy, but not only that, just like I said, everything is so ordered. I think the Rome News Tribune to the Associated Press had to happen the way it happened. I think meeting Katie and the rest of my team at the Times Dispatch on the Metro team needed to happen the way it happened, because I learned that there are people who care about the work. Because one of the things I went through in college was thinking that nobody else cared about the state of Black people, including other Black people. That was one thing I think I thought that people thought everything was hopeless. But hope is
Mm.
such a discipline. Hope is such a discipline. And so I think that I wouldn't have understood the concept of hope being a discipline without the way that this all happened for me. And also understanding that my job isn't to save the world. My job is to be there for somebody. My job is to be there for the community and doing community work alongside the thousands of community workers who are out there. And so, yeah, Finally I Can Talk is really about the fact that I can do what I want, say what I want, be who I want, without the hovering feeling of
Mm.
journalism. Because you know how it goes. Like in J school, they're like, yeah, social media, no personality, none of
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
as you can see, I have a very big personality.
Yeah.
And so that was hard. Like I make jokes when I'm uncomfortable. There would be times where I would make jokes in the newsroom and nobody would laugh. And I'd be like, wow, and now I'm even more uncomfortable.
Oh no, the worst feeling.
No, literally. But then I just learned that that's just how journalism is. Everybody can
Mhm.
be so serious in journalism.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think that the way I'm thinking about it is definitely focusing on more autonomy, focusing on the culture as well, because Black people we're a very spiritual people, whether it's Christianity or Hoodoo or voodoo, any of our or Ifa, we're a very spiritual people. And so that's one thing I had to learn too, was that because a lot of the public health stuff will have you thinking about herbalism in a way that's harmful. Like, no, you need to go to the doctor instead. But birth doesn't have to be this very medicalized thing. Like, yes, of course, make sure you're not high risk. And all of those things, that we have these advancements for a reason, but also you have autonomy over your birth. You have autonomy over your story. You have autonomy over your body. And that's something that I think I took away from the AP and being an Interlight at the same time, was that you have this autonomy over your body, and there's not a right way to do things. The right way is your way. The right way is the info, of course, and that's what I'm there for as a doula, giving you as much information as possible. Because my job is not to make decisions for you. My job is to give you your autonomy back.
Yeah.
With the information that there is out there, with the evidence-backed information that there is.
Kenya, thank you so much for doing this. It was so fun to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. I know a big yapper. I tell people I'm a professional yapper.
The perfect podcast guest. Thanks for listening. The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. Our producer is Amanda Dara, and I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. You can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks.